Hello. I am here to give you a pretty super boring talk about vulnerability disclosure policies, but I'm going to try to make it interesting because I really like cat memes. So we're going to get started now. Everybody ready? Okay, great. All right, so who am I? I'm Kimber Dowsett, and I am the founder of Sonar Security. I'm a very boutique niche consultancy that works with things in space and on Earth. I don't talk about my clients, they don't talk about me, but you can just trust me. I have a website, so it's cool. I used to work for Apple, VMware, The Economist, any number of startups that have been acquired. I made a lot of people rich, so hopefully it's my turn now. I'm a former senior mission information specialist at NASA, so I secured instrument and ground systems and the Hubble Space Telescope. If you want to talk to me about lasers, cryogenics, optics security, that's kind of my jam. I also really love satellites. If you have one you need me to secure, I cost a lot of money. I did a stint in the government, because who didn't? As head of infrastructure engineering, and I was the chief incident responder for unnamed US federal agency. And I like these things: encryption, government transparency, user privacy, open source solutions. I want to democratize technology. I hope you all do too. And I was in the Tribe Hacker book series. If you want to read about me saying some things that probably you don't care about, it's whatever. But Tribe of Hackers, I'm in a couple of those. Okay, so today, though, we're not going to talk about space or satellites. Sorry, I was going to do that talk, but I ran out of time. So today, we're going to talk about VDPs, vulnerability disclosure policies. Who knows what they are? Cool, a couple people. So a lot of you are going to jail. But maybe not after this talk, right? I'm not going to read my slides to you. I don't read slides, but I put the words there for those of you who are able to see those. You can read those, and for the visually impaired, I'll send out a copy of the slide deck, and you can enjoy it that way. So briefly, I'm going to tell you where VDPs kind of originated in the US in this sort of broad scale terms. I don't know. So US CERT, everybody know, Homeland Security. We like them sometimes not, but US CERT team, those guys are great. Folks are great. They do all these things. And again, I don't like to read slides, so just take my word for it. But basically, you get a really bad vulnerability, a really bad breach, a ransomware attack, whatever. US CERT is the website you go to and tell them about it. And then they'll do a lot of coordination with Homeland Security to get you all set up. But they don't just care about like giant corporations. They also care about small companies. If there's a chance that little library you built, say, I don't know, maybe is now a backdoor for a whole bunch of stuff, possibly. I don't know. So US CERT would do that. Hopefully you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, please go check the news. So because I also want to make sure my slideshow and my talk are friendly for the visually impaired, you're going to see slides with links. It doesn't mean I expect you to memorize them. The deck will go out, but I just want to make sure these resources are available. Okay. So the DOJ was like, oh, this is a really good idea. It's super cool that people have a place to report vulnerabilities that are sort of impacting national security and US CERT, but what if we could set up a framework for other companies to do it their own way and have vulnerabilities reported locally to their security teams instead of everybody sending all their vulns up to US CERT, who's woefully understaffed, right? So DOJ put together a framework. It's super simple. They want you to design, then plan, then draft, then implement your policy. So everybody's ready to go write one now? You got it? Great, good. Everybody's a lawyer. So I'll just keep this here for folks who want to just snapshot what you want to Google. That's what you do. Or DuckDuckGo, which is my preference. Okay, so 18F is a digital delivery services. That's a division of TTS that became a division of GSA, but GSA is the largest agency within the executive branch of government. Why did I put this up here? Who cares about 18F? Well, 18F put out the first vulnerability disclosure policy framework, and for anyone to use, and then open sourced it, and it became a catalyst for the first bug bounty program in a U.S. civilian agency. Why do you think I put this up here, folks? Anyone? I wrote that, and I was the technical team lead for that other thing. So that's kind of my baby there. It lives on, and it was one of the biggest contracts to a small company, and it doesn't matter. It was dope, and I had a lot of fun. All right, so again. Okay, so I also like to talk a little bit about what's happening in the EU, because a lot of our jobs, do we have red teamers in the room? Yes, no, maybe, right? Blue teamers even who catch things. Who knows what the word pivot means? Oh, God, you guys are like half asleep. Who has pivoted to something they were never supposed to pivot to? Well, it was out of scope, and it wasn't in your engagement letter, right? And it happened to be in the EU. You probably would have wanted to know that the EU has completely different set of rules and laws around the way that vulnerability disclosure needs to happen. There is some coordination between CERT EU and US CERT. That's important to know. Each country is really, within the EU, is going to have their own sort of mandated reporting around vuln disclosure. But the reason I bring this up is so that you can think of the world as bigger than the United States. And that server that you pop in AWS East might be connected to a server in Romania, and I don't want you to go to jail. So you can read these things. Great. Here's some resources. Perfect. I added some stuff about the EU Cyber Resiliency Act. I, again, like to have you folks thinking about the world as bigger than the United States, because all of the cloud computing systems that we work with, unless they're very specifically something like GovCloud, where they dictate that their servers are all housed within the United States. You all know about this kind of thing, right? AWS has a whole division where their servers have to live in the US for the government to be able to use them for certain applications and storage solutions. So, but the rest of those, I mean, we've got stuff all over the world, right? We've got stuff living in GCP. We've got stuff living in AWS all over the place. We've got NVIDIA now providing CoreWeave with GPUs that'll just like blow your mind if you want to do some large language models or whatever. Do you know where those live? Anybody? Yeah, me either. So we need to be really careful about where we pivot. So it's kind of just important to understand there are laws otherwise. I do add homework things here because I think it's super fun. Just, we don't always get vulnerability disclosure right, neither does the EU. A group of hackers there put together a really great open letter about how we should make it better, and it's a good letter. You should look it up. Great. Okay, so we talked a little bit about national interest vulnerabilities with US CERT or CERT EU. I'm just going to talk about that real quick. For national interest vulnerabilities, you're going to have some different guidelines. So whether you're red team, blue team, you're the CEO, or you're the poor IT person who found the breach, like, doesn't matter. We've got some pretty strict timelines to adhere to if you even suspect that the vulnerability you found, the breach you found, impacts national interest, right? So I, for a change, have some breaking news in my slide deck. Last week, CISA announced a new proposal for timelines. You can go look at their proposal. They might even have it open for a comment period, but I don't know. But it's definitely in proposal stage now, and it'll probably get passed because it's actually not as stringent as some of the EU laws. But here we see substantial cyber incidents within 72 hours of discovery. 72 hours. Ransom within 24 hours. So ransomware attack, or your company just low-key paid the ransom, 24 hours. And you have to keep all the information relevant for making your report in 2 years. So why do you think I have an Anchorman meme here? Right. So also, if we look at the bottom here, the EU has reporting to NISA within 24 hours. How many of you have had to not only stop the bleeding on a massive attack, and also compile a complete government report subject to review by like the Attorney General within 24 hours. Anyone? Nice. Did you look like this person? You had like, you don't know what you're writing about. You're stopping the bleeding while you've got somebody taking notes. You don't know what's going on. So anyway, the moral of this slide, folks, is get really good at writing reports. Okay, so I gave you some EU homework if any of you are working with systems that are international or cross-country boundaries. Please look up these things. You want to look up the proposed cyber incident reporting rule that I just told you about. There's more stuff in there. I just gave you the deadlines, but there's some good stuff in there. CFAA versus the EU computer abuse legislation in the context of red teaming. So it's a really good piece to read if you're pivoting across systems that are in different countries. And then you can look up the Tiber framework if you want to. It's a little bit dense, but if you like reading, go read that. Okay, I talked really fast because that's historical stuff and I find it like really boring and I just want to get it done, like the vegetables, so I can save like the dessert. Anyway, so we're going to dive in now and talk about the 5 W's and the H of a VDP. Has anyone in this room ever written a VDP? Awesome. The thing I love about this crowd is how lively you are and how receptive I feel like you're being to my content. That's pretty amazing. Yeah, good job, everyone. Okay, so we're going to go through this, and it's going to be for people who need to write one or for people who need to like understand what one is because you want to make sure you're following the rules of one, right? So companies have vulnerabilities they don't know they have, and you might have to find them. Who's going to find the vulnerabilities? I wrote it on the slide for you. Good actors, bad actors, all the hackers, right? Okay, so this is who is trying to pop you, right? Or I guess who you're trying to pop. So companies may not have a VDP. They assume they know they'd have a problem. Who works for a company where your CEO knew when you had a security problem immediately? Who works for a company where you told him like 30 days after it was remediated and you got it fixed? Who doesn't tell the CEO shit? Right. So let's not assume that companies will know they have a problem if we're out here red teaming or bug bounties, hunting, whatever. And for the companies in the room, let's not assume that you know about all the things going on under your roof. All right, so we even have, bless them, the companies who think that if we as bounty hunters, red teamers, hackers, enthusiasts, people who just have insomnia and run Shodan at 3 in the morning, that we might let them know in email or social media if we find a vulnerability. Who's going to do that if there's no bounty? Right? Why would we? Who cares? We're going to pivot. But we're not, because no one wants to go to jail. I was like, hypothetically speaking, in the 2000s, we would have pivoted. But now we're not, because we understand we'll go to jail. Thumbs up, we don't want to go to jail, right? Great, thanks. Okay, so this is Mordor because I'm a nerd. All right, so how do they do it? Well, who has actually written up a proof of concept for a vulnerability they found? Surely. Do we have there we go, right? We have some people in the room. For people who like to do that, buy this book, POC GTFO. There's a few volumes of it. It's super fun. It's a great collection of just really interesting hacks and the proof of concept around those. It's actually like kind of a good way to see how POCs can be written. But anyway, the thing that you need to take away from this is that you need to give a company a good POC, proof of concept, to show them where their issues are, or you're going to hear something like, well, I couldn't reproduce it on my system. That's not real. Has anyone ever heard someone say that? Works fine on my machine. Okay, I know there's some former sysadmins in the room. There's gotta be, right? All right. All right, so you find a vuln. When can you announce it? Who wants to get on the big stage at DEF CON and talk about the thing they did? Are you all afraid of public speaking? That one will make you barf, man. That one will make you barf, but super fun. So if we're talking about that in the context of vulnerability disclosure policies, a good one is going to give you a timeline. So as a researcher, you're going to know exactly how long the vendor, we'll just call them vendor for the purposes of this discussion, will take to fix these before you can announce. And it's sort of like a contract, like a handshake between the two of you. If they get close to the deadline, you'll give them a little more time if you think they're actively working on it. If they're not doing anything to fix it and they hit the deadline and you're like, well, I think that like 30 million Americans need to know that their data was breached. Well, you're following the guidelines of the VDP. Don't get sued by like going on stage at DEF CON and talking about it before you followed the rules of the VDPs, right? And so if there are company people in the room, that just probably goes to say like your VDPs need to have a timeline in them. And it needs to be a reasonable timeline because researchers want to talk about their research or write about it or whatever. All right, so why wouldn't you report something you found? Is my background picture at all helpful? I have given you the answer. This is like C on the SATs. The answer's right here. CFAA. Anybody read it? Anybody in this room read CFAA? One person. Y'all are all going, 2 people. You're all going to jail. The rest of you are going to jail. Do you know how broad this thing is? Do you know how broadly worded this thing is? In theory, you could share a password with someone who works in your office and you have just given them unauthorized access to a system. And if your employer is so inclined, somebody's going to jail. So y'all should really read this CFAA. It's super boring, but just read it. The Computer MIsuse Act. So this is kind of a misnomer here, but remember how we talked about in the EU, like each country has their own kind of policies around VDPs. They also adhere to sort of different rules around the Computer MIsuse Act. It's not like a single act I'm referring to here. This is just sort of the general terminology that you'll see if you Googled a country in Europe with the Computer MIsuse Act. You'll find like their version of it, and they are going to vary state to state. Some countries are going to be a lot more strict than others. Some countries may have some language around good faith that others don't have. So if you think that there's any chance that you're going to pivot to any other country outside the US after you've read CFAA so you know what you're doing wrong in the US, before you pivot, like go read that country's Misuse Act as well, please. No one's going to jail. All right. You might not want to report because there's no clear path for reporting. How many people are going to spend more than an hour chasing down someone to tell them they have a vuln? Not me. How much is your time worth? Put that thing right on Twitter. Allegedly, you would not do that if you did use a SOC, but you would not do that, right? And then if they have a VDP, but the scope's super vague, like, don't touch those systems. I don't know what to tell you. I have fears of prison, so there. So there's got to be a better way. Anybody remember what happened with our coal fire researchers? We'll come back to them. But right now we're going to talk about better ways, like VDPs, like disclosures. So we're going to talk about more about VDPs, because by the time you leave here, you're going to be like, she said that word over and over as though she was trying to brainwash us into going back to our bosses and telling them our company needs a VDP, or going back to our red team lead and saying, does that engagement next week, do they have a VDP? What did their contract look like? Can I take a look at that engagement letter? These are all like totally valid questions that you can ask. Please, 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 I'm going to go on a side quest right now. Do not take the word of your PM that you have permission to access the system. Okay? Everyone got that? Give me a thumbs up that you understand the PMs don't know what's in the engagement letter. Okay? They're just point and shoot. It's okay to review the engagement letters. Okay, so we're going to talk basics. So if you have a VDP, let's say you're in a company that needs one, or you're a hacker, red teamer, blue teamer, purple teamer, any of the teamers who are going to go tracking down bugs and vulns, even within sometimes subsidiaries of your own companies. You're going to want to make sure that some basics are covered in these VDPs. So I'm going to go through these in slides. This is basically the table of contents for the next 6 slides. Great. All right, so scope. Scope is hands down probably the most important thing that you should look for in a VDP or put in a VDP, okay? You can do your org. You can do wildcard.yourorg.com. I have be specific. Nope. Be very specific. Scope is where things fall apart very quickly, right? Scope is where you tell someone it's okay to pivot to this system or this site or this server. If it's not in scope, if it's not laid out in scope, it's not in scope. So you can't assume, well, it wasn't listed, so it's probably okay. No. We're only touching things that are listed. You feel me? Very specific. So we've got vulnerability types. Some things are a big deal. Everything isn't a big deal, right? How many people have had their Cyclone DX files come back with critical vulnerabilities in, I don't know, some Linux library that you don't even use? Or a Linux kernel that you're not using the kernel, you're not deploying it in your SBOM, you just have the header in your SBOM. But now all of a sudden, Cyclone DX thinks you have a critical vulnerability. And then the PM's going wild, the team's going wild, everybody's just running wild. It wasn't a big deal because it actually wasn't a vulnerability that you were vulnerable to, right? So, your devs are going to be your best friends in these situations. The people who build the systems, architect the systems, they're really going to be the ones to tell you yes or no. And this is just a little guidance here if you want it. For companies or for my security folks in the room, you don't need to spend a whole lot of time diving in to figure out whether or not you're vulnerable or that you can reproduce it, until you actually just talk to the developer first. Just go to his cubicle or hit him up on Zoom, right? And see. They'll give you an answer probably faster than you could find on your own. All right. Companies don't have control over third-party applications. Those are always going to be excluded from VDPs. So great, you found a problem in a dependency that the vendor can't fix because it's not their library, plugin, SaaS product, whatever. So open source is great. Third-party library dependencies are not. Who in the room has ever run a scan on anything? Right? And of those scans, who found lots of vulnerabilities? And of those vulnerabilities, how many were third-party libraries that you couldn't do anything about? 90% of them. So be specific in your scoping. Be specific in the type of vulnerability that you're willing to cover in your VDPs. Be very specific. So hackers love rules. You guys are the worst. I'm getting ready to leave. I'm getting ready to leave this room. Hackers love rules. Ha ha ha. Do you like a laughter sign? This is ridiculous. All right. Well, access versus exfiltration. Raise your hand if you think access is good. Accessing a system with permission. Is that cool? That's cool? Yeah, we're going to do that. Raise your hand if you're going to exfiltrate. Maybe you won't go to jail. Maybe some of you will. I heard that. So potential exploits versus actual exploits. Be very specific, right? If you're reporting the vulnerability, be very specific. If it's an actual exploit or a potential exploit, this is where your POC comes in handy, okay? Show them how you'll do it. If you remember nothing I say today other than the letters VDP and do not exfiltrate, that's your takeaway from today's talk. If you don't remember anything else, cool. I probably just saved you from going to jail. Maybe. Tell me if I do someday, though. All right, so timelines. Our clock's ticking. We have time to fix, time to disclose, time to panic. Anybody ever panicked? Panicking is my favorite. I was once working for an unnamed federal agency and was at Black Hat desperately, with a group of other engineers who met me out there because we were attending the conference, trying to fix a vulnerability about 30 minutes before a researcher was going to go on stage and tell the world about it. That will cause you to need like heartburn medication and a nap. It was pretty bad, but that's the time to panic, right? You have to understand that researchers, and you as researchers, get to talk about your work unless you sign an NDA, and then you can't. But that's where the VDP comes into play. That's your handshake, right? We're gonna fix this, and then you get to talk about it. All right, so this is my disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. I just don't want to go to jail. I'm going to say that over and over in case like the feds are in the room now. I don't want to go to jail. I don't access any government systems anymore. So there's a little bit of language in CFAA now around good faith discovery. Anybody know anything about what good faith discovery means? Yeah. Cool. Is it just me? Because I feel like that's kind of subjective. I feel like, what does good faith really mean? Because I could argue to you that like everything I do is in good faith. I'm just trying to make the internet more secure for everyone, right? Good luck. Proper disclosure. The elephant in the room, I mean, is obviously going to be CFAA and violations. The CFAA actually went through, there was a case that hit the Supreme Court a couple years ago. It's kind of the first, I guess, really, let's say, scrutiny of CFAA in a long time. So the Supreme Court ended up ruling 6-3 against the researcher in this case, that it actually doesn't matter if you didn't intend to pivot. Really, I'm giving you the TLDR, but you can go read the ruling. If you pivoted, you're in trouble. So CFAA actually got like worse for researchers as a result of a thing that we thought maybe it would get better. So do not trust the law to protect you in these situations. And I know you think, well, I have a good job at a Fortune 50 company and my boss won't let me get in trouble. Cool story. Cool story. Ask my coal fire homies who spent the night in jail about that one. Okay. So let's just say at the bare minimum requirements of a VDP, right? You got to have a place for people to report. So they found the thing, or you want them to tell you the thing. How are they supposed to tell you? Okay, well, I gave you some ways. You can do it however you want, but a dedicated email is a good start. If I email security@yourorg.com, I'm going to expect that that's supposed to get to somebody in security who's actually going to monitor that email box. Don't just set up the email box and then forget to tell anybody to monitor it, please, because that happens too. You can do web forms. I mean, it's cool, but you could do encrypted web forms, and then your hackers will like you a little better. And then there's platforms, VDP platforms. So think you have permission, think again. So this is where we can talk a little bit about that Supreme Court case, but I kind of already spilled the beans on that. The researcher lost, and it's worse for all of us. The coal fire case, anybody like read about that? You know kind of what happened? Kind of boiled down to maybe the person who signed off on the authorization letter wasn't actually the person who had the authority to sign off on it. Might boil down to like dragging a sheriff out of bed after midnight, and he was pretty tired and pissed off. Like, he's now gone on, that sheriff, to talk about what happened and how to do things better. So super interesting case if you want to read about it. But I think the moral of that one is read the engagement letters. That's a great start, but also make sure the person who signed off on your engagement actually had the authorization to do that. I see more than I should my friends in trouble because they go in to do a physical pen test and they have their engagement letter and it's all good. But the biggest gotcha is that the company that hired them to do it don't actually own the building. Like the company's just leasing the space. So they're violating the building owner's space. And that's like how you get fined and get in trouble and sometimes arrested. I mean, it's usually cleared up pretty quickly, but pay attention to who's signing those letters. All right, I put some current events in here just because this big thing's happening in the EU. By October, all the company states have to have a coordinated vulnerability disclosure policy adopted and published. How many companies and small governments do you think have not even started this yet? Probably most of them, honestly. So September is going to be a busy month for a lot of companies in the EU. But it's good to know this stuff. I think it's good to know this stuff because I'm a nerd and I care about this stuff. And I don't want to go to jail. And I don't want you to go to jail here or in another country. All right. So if we put it all together, right, and the coordinated disclosure works the way it's supposed to, we've got a researcher, hacker, or just a help desk person in IT reporting a vulnerability. Then the organization's going to respond. Our stakeholders are then going to be notified. Our vulnerability is going to get mitigated. And then it's going to get disclosed to the public by people like me who love to stand up here and be like, oh, I popped MBS. So y'all need a VDP. Everybody does. You either need to know where to look for one or your company needs to have one. Yep. This is the part where I just, if I say the thing, oh, it's like a brainwashing technique, right? I'm trying to help you. Let me help you. You don't have to write it from scratch. CYSA has a template. Who knows what CYSA is? Oh, come on. Everybody knows what CYSA is. The head of CYSA got fired by a tweet a couple years ago. That's when everybody heard of CYSA. Come on. All right, so they added some general instructions. They're pretty good. They break down all the things you need. They added a doc template if you like working in Word. I mean, we all love that. And they also offer instructions on how to build a web form template, which is the thing we talked about, right? A good way to disclose is you can add a web form template to your site. So there's some homework. CYSA has a template for a VDP. You just follow the directions. Bug Crowd. Who knows Bug Crowd? Yay! Bug Crowd hosts VDPs. Did you know that? Did you know that they don't just do bounties? They host VDPs. They do crowdsource security, but they also give you some standard terms to get started. Pretty cool of them. They don't have to do that. It's nice. And they help you with the scoping part around that non-qualifying submission type. So nobody's getting a bounty for a robot.txt file. All right. HackerOne, who's heard of them? Come on. They have the best parties in Vegas. It's fine. They also do more than bounties. They also host VDPs. And they have a really kind of cool system that they'll define and publish your VDP and then help you wrangle with the third parties who are trying to report to that VDP. And this is outside of the bounty program. This is just phone disclosure, okay? And then they'll review and triage your reports. This part isn't free. The hosting the VDP part's free, but the rest of the stuff is a product. But it's cool to know you don't have to roll this stuff yourself and in-house or I don't know. Stop rolling your own everything, people. I know you're smart, but you don't have to roll your own everything. Okay. All right, so the DOD. We'll talk about the DOD for a minute because they did this program, Hack the Pentagon. Who's heard of Hack the Pentagon? The VDP for Hack the Pentagon is probably the most important thing that you would put in your toolbox if you wanted to be a bounty hunter who participated in this program. You do not want to go outside of scope when you're dealing with the Pentagon. There, full stop. I got nothing else on that one. So they do all of their red team engagements or their Hack the Pentagon program. It's all by invitation only. You can kind of duck go that to figure out how to be a part of that. A VDP doesn't mean you'll get paid. They're not bug bounty programs. You can, and I have here, and probably should, have a VDP without a bug bounty program. Does anybody know what a bug bounty program is? Oh my God. Is it because it's so close to dinner, everyone's starving? Is that what it is? Okay, so it's fine. I mean, I ate before I came because I'm good at time management and planning, but you do you. Clearly, one of us is a better risk assessor. So there's no world where any company would have a bug bounty without having a VDP. A VDP is a prerequisite of any bounty program. Got me? So that's whether you're dealing with HackerOne or BugCrowd or Synac or whoever you want to deal with, right? Like, they're going to have a BDP. Okay, so bounties. Hackers love money, right? Is that true? Like, hackers don't love rules. Hackers love money. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about bug bounties because I'm not going to talk about gig economy, but I'm going to tell you a story because I like stories. So if you're thinking about launching a bug bounty program at your company, so this is specifically for that. Hacker's going to hack, researcher's going to research, bounty hunter's going to hunt. If they've got one, go get it, go get your coin, get the low-hanging fruit, run all the scans, you do you, follow the VDP, stay in scope, whatever. So this is for the companies or folks in the room who are thinking they're going to pitch bug bounties to their bosses, or the bosses who think that they want bug bounties. Bug bounty programs are not a viable replacement for red teams. There's no world where setting up a bug bounty program to just get that like quick and dirty scans and find all the bugs. And yeah, that is gonna cost you a lot more money, and it's not a replacement for a red team like in-house, right? It's something that you'd wanna do once you've got your ship tight and you're ready and your red team has done all they can do and you're sure you're secure. That's when you can have any sort of discussion about bounty. But so the reason being, the trouble with incentives, they work. Cobra effect, who knows? So I get to tell a story? Yay. So the Cobra effect is sort of a term, you know, like there's a Streisand effect. We know that one, right? So Cobra effect's one of those kind of stories. But the Cobra effect dates back to like British colonial rule of India. And they were having a Cobra problem in India. This is like way back when, right? So the government decided they were going to offer bounties for all the Cobra heads that were brought into like the government drop-off point. Right? Just like your company wants to offer bounties for all the bugs you have in your systems, right? Okay, you with me? Okay, whatever. Just take this ride with me, right? So the snakes were disappearing. It was working great, right? But then the farmers were like, well, wait a minute. What if we started breeding cobras? And then we like killed them and took the heads in, and then we could get the bounties, right? So this is like your company. Wait a minute. What if we just start introducing bugs into the system, but then we fix them because then we can get the bounties, right? You feel me? So the farmers, this is a very abridged version of the story, but the farmers stop growing food and just turn all their farms into Cobra farms because that's like lucrative, right? So then womp womp, people don't have food. So that's awful. So what does the government do? They end the bounty program, right? Like, oh no, we got to end the bounty program. We can't do that. So now the farmers need to farm, but they got all these snakes on their farm. So then what do? They just turn the snakes loose, right? They just release the virus in your system or set off the worm or whatever, right? So then the town's overrun with like poisonous cobras or venomous cobras, and it was not a good time. So, I mean, I think that's sort of a really great analogy for a bug bounty program. You really need to be sure that you understand what you're getting into there. I find that it's a proceed with caution approach there. I'm 100% for bug bounties. I was the technical team lead for the very first one in a civilian government agency, but it took a lot of work and a lot of planning to get there. So tread with caution. All right, so that's it. I'm telling you to report carefully, hack responsibly. Please don't go to jail. Everybody's going to go like see if the last thing they pop, like if the company had a VDP. Probably not. You're going to go to dinner and forget all about this. But you're going to remember two things. VDPs, just remember it, and don't exfiltrate. Never exfiltrate. All right, so here's my contact info. You're welcome to talk to me, send me an email, whatever you want to do. And also my nickname is just Bat, so most people around here would just call me Bat. That's why that's there. And I wanted to leave a little time for questions because I know I threw a lot of content at you really quickly, but if you don't have any, that's okay too. Are you curious? You can be curious. So, right. So the question is, what are my thoughts on like third-party bounty hunters who would look at the VDP and then, oh, that's kind of trash. Okay. So, uh, what do you do? What are my thoughts on like third-party companies that would put bounties on your software? Um, and then when people find vulnerabilities in your software, are they paying the bounties? In your software. So a company offered a $100,000 bounty, unrelated to this gentleman's company, to find a specific code execution vulnerability that was then probably handed to them as a POC. I just don't know why anybody would do that. Oh, yeah, no. Okay, so they're like farming bounties to find your backdoors. Yeah, that's trash. Wouldn't everybody's opinion on that be that it's trash? Unless you're the company that's like making $100,000 to do it. But it seems like that should be unauthorized access of a computer. I would find that that would be, if I were in a court of law, hashtag not a lawyer, that seems like unauthorized access of a computer system to me. Right. Targeting individuals and paying bounties. I mean, that's pretty messed up, man. I don't know. I have no academic answer for you other than that's pretty messed up. And I would definitely check with a good like IP attorney on that one because that seems not cool. Right. Yeah. That's a really unique scenario that I have not considered in any of this because who would do that? Right? I mean, how often do we say that? We don't need to close that port. Who would do that? I'm totally doing that right now. But like, really pay a bounty for somebody else's backdoor? I mean, that's kind of genius. But it's open source. And you know what? Let's talk after because that just is like a lot. Okay. Any more questions in the room? Yes. So the question is, how do you deal with vulnerability disclosure and NDAs? So it's a really good question, and the answer is it depends. So sometimes the NDA is going to have very clear language around vulnerabilities that have to be reported because you're beholden to like national security laws. You're beholden to the rules and requirements of US CERT. For other vulnerabilities, if you're a researcher and you go in there either as a bounty hunter, some of the bounty programs have like private closed bounty sessions. If you sign an NDA, like you're beholden to the NDA, the caveat being a national security issue. And then at that point, you have to like, the company that you're working with is going to have to coordinate with you because they also know they're required by law to get those things reported. But no, you're not going to be able to go stand on a stage and talk about it. That kind of stinks. But you got to do a really fun hack. So, I mean, win-win. You get to keep your job. Win-win. Any more questions? All right. Thanks, folks.